It was a crisp, clear September morning in River Hill. Meredith Price parked her silver sedan in the employee parking lot of Healthy Life Pharmacy at 7:30 a.m., as usual, half an hour before her shift began. She loved those quiet moments before opening when she could check the medication deliveries and prepare for the day. Meredith had been a pharmacist for 8 years. Her white coat hung in the back room. As she took it out of her locker, she smoothed her dark brown hair, which was pulled back into a practical ponytail, and glanced at her reflection in the small mirror. She was 42, but only a few wrinkles were beginning to appear at the corners of her eyes. Meredith was not beautiful in the conventional sense, but her open green eyes endeared her to her patients. The workday proceeded as usual: consultations, prescriptions, checking dosages. During her lunch break, she stopped by the Morning Dew Cafe across the street, as she usually did. It was a ritual for her and Nolan to have lunch together on Wednesdays when his construction site was nearby. Nolan Price was already sitting at their favorite table by the window, looking at drawings on his tablet. His dark blonde hair was slightly tousled by the wind, and there was a streak of construction dust on his cheek that he hadn't noticed. When he saw his wife, he smiled. "Hello, hard workers." Meredith leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. "Did you forget to wash up after the site again?" "I had to check the foundation on the west side urgently," Nolan explained, closing his tablet. "The groundwater is higher than the reports indicated." "It's a real headache." Nolan was 45, and in his 15 years as a civil engineer, he had seen it all. He specialized in residential construction and was respected in River Hill for his honesty and quality work. "How was your day?" he asked, sipping his coffee. "The usual." Mrs. Orson asked again if I could give her a sleeping pill without a prescription, and I explained for the 100th time why that wasn't possible. Meredith smiled as she looked over the menu, even though she already knew she was going to order the chicken salad. Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Nolan apologized and answered. His foreman was reporting another problem at the construction site. "I'm sorry, honey. I have to get back right away," he said, looking guiltily at his wife. "See you tonight." "It's okay." Meredith nodded understandingly. She watched her husband walk away when she noticed a man at a table in the corner. He was sitting alone with a cup of coffee and seemed to be watching her over his newspaper. When their eyes met, the stranger quickly looked away. After lunch, Meredith returned to the pharmacy, and the rest of the day passed without incident. In the evening, she went to the Fit Zone gym, where she did Pilates twice a week. After changing and laying out her mat in the gym, she saw the same man again. Now he was setting up a treadmill in front of the mirrored wall. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and black sweatpants. Tall, slim, with a neatly trimmed beard and dark hair streaked with gray at the temples, he looked to be in his early 40s. Probably a new member, Meredith thought, although something told her that wasn't the case. She tried to concentrate on her workout, but kept catching his gaze in the mirror. When she got home, she found Nolan at his laptop, finishing up a cottage design for a new client. "Dinner's in the microwave," he said, without looking up. "Sorry, I have to finish this by tomorrow." "That's fine," Meredith replied, although deep down she wished her husband would take a break from work sometimes. The next morning, when she stopped at Morning Dew for coffee before work, Meredith froze. The same man was sitting at a table near the entrance, looking at something on his phone. This time he was dressed in a dark blue business suit and looked like a typical office worker. As she walked past, picking up her latte, the man looked up and nodded slightly, as if he knew her. On Friday evening, she and Fiona Welsh, her best friend since high school, met at the Olive Branch restaurant. "You look troubled," Fiona remarked as they ordered. "Is something wrong?" Fiona worked as a literature teacher at a local school. They had been friends for over 25 years, since 8th grade. Unlike the calm Meredith, Fiona was emotional, with an ever-changing personal life. "I'm probably just tired." Meredith tried to brush it off, But under her friend's penetrating gaze, she gave in. Although there is something strange. For the last 3 days, I've been running into the same man in different places. At the cafe across from work, at the gym, even at the supermarket yesterday. Maybe he's interested in you, Fiona winked playfully. You're still an attractive woman, you know. Come on, Meredith grimaced. I'm not 17 to be pursued by admirers. Besides, I'm married. A ring on your finger doesn't make you invisible to other men. Fiona took a sip of wine. How are things with Nolan? Everything still the same? Meredith thought she detected a hint of something in that question, but she didn't think much of it. Everything's fine. He's working hard on a new housing development project. He says if everything works out, he'll be able to take a vacation in the summer. How nice, Fiona said. At that moment, Meredith noticed him, the same man sitting at a table 3 tables away, staring openly in their direction. Fiona, don't turn around, but he's here. The man I told you about, at the bar, wearing a gray jacket. Fiona slowly turned her head as if surveying the restaurant. He's cute, she said, and clearly not poor, judging by his watch and shoes. That's not the point, Meredith replied irritably. He's everywhere I go. It's starting to scare me. Are you sure it's not a coincidence? Fiona looked at her friend intently. River Hill isn't that big of a town. 4 times in 3 days? In completely different places? As they finished dinner, the man paid the bill and left, but Meredith noticed that he lingered in the parking lot, sitting in a dark sedan. Maybe you should report it to the police, Fiona suggested. If he's really following you, what am I going to say? Arrest the man who goes to the same public places as me? Meredith shook her head. They'll say they have no grounds for concern. Then tell Nolan. Let him talk to this guy, scare him off. Nolan's got his head in his work right now, Meredith sighed. He's so busy he hardly notices what's going on at home. I don't want to bother him until I'm sure it's something serious. Fiona frowned. Meredith, you always do this. You put other people's peace of mind above your own. If you're uncomfortable, there's a reason. They left the restaurant together, and Fiona insisted on walking Meredith to her car. The dark sedan was still in the parking lot. Write down his license plate number, Fiona advised, and if you see him again, take a photo. We need proof. Meredith nodded, though part of her still hoped that these encounters were just a strange coincidence. On the way home, she wondered whether she should tell Nolan. Their marriage had never been passionate, more comfortable, and reliable. They had met through mutual friends at a barbecue when she was 25 and he was 28. A year later, they were married, bought a house, and planned to have children, but Meredith discovered she had fertility issues. 15 years of marriage had made them good partners rather than passionate lovers. They valued the convenience and comfort of living together, although Meredith sometimes found herself thinking that they lacked the spark she saw in some couples. Nolan was already asleep at home. Meredith quietly undressed and lay down next to him, staring at the ceiling. The dark figure of a stranger stood before her eyes, causing a vague uneasiness. Maybe I'm really overreacting, she thought, turning on her side and pulling the blanket up to her chin. The next 2 days passed without incident. Meredith saw no sign of the mysterious man and almost convinced herself that it had all been a figment of her imagination. On Monday, she breathed a sigh of relief and returned to her normal routine. But when she stopped by the pen and ink bookstore after work on Tuesday to buy a new book for her book club, her heart skipped a beat. He was standing by the detective shelf, browsing through a paperback. This time, when he caught her eye, he didn't look away but smiled and nodded slightly, as if they were acquaintances. Meredith spun around and left the store, forgetting about the book. Her heart was pounding and the thought pulsed through her head. This isn't a coincidence. He's watching me. Leaving the bookstore, Meredith walked quickly to her car. Her hands trembled as she tried to put the key in the lock. Glancing over her shoulder, she was relieved to see that the stranger hadn't followed her, at least Not right away. She started the engine and hurried out of the parking lot, glancing periodically in the rearview mirror. All the way home, Meredith thought about what had happened. 5 encounters in 8 days, all in different places. It couldn't be a coincidence, especially his smile and nod, as if they were old acquaintances. There was something unsettling about it, almost intimate, as if he knew more about her than she knew about him. When she got home, the first thing she did was lock all the doors and check the windows. Nolan was late for work. He sent a message saying he would be late because of problems with building material suppliers. Meredith poured herself a glass of wine to calm down and called Fiona. "He showed up again," she said without preamble when her friend answered. "At the bookstore. And this time he smiled at me like an old friend." "Seriously?" Fiona's voice sounded concerned. "Meredith, this doesn't seem like a coincidence anymore. Did you manage to take a photo?" "No. I panicked and just left," Meredith sighed, angry at herself for missing the opportunity. "But I'm absolutely sure it's the same man. Tall, fit, with a dark beard streaked with gray. Well-dressed, looks like a businessman or a lawyer." "Did you talk to him?" "No," Meredith exclaimed. "And I'm not going to. All this stalking scares me." "Are you sure he's stalking you?" Fiona asked cautiously. "Maybe he just moved to your neighborhood and goes to the same places you do?" "Fiona," Meredith tried to speak calmly, "he was at the cafe near my work, then at my gym, then at the restaurant where we had dinner, then at the grocery store near our house, and now at the bookstore. Either we have exactly the same tastes and daily routine, or he's following me. And the way he looks at me, there's something about him that makes me feel like I'm being watched." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Fiona said, "Okay, I believe you. That sounds really creepy. Have you told Nolan?" "Not yet. He's working late today and I don't want to talk to him on the phone. He might not take it seriously." "Meredith," Fiona's voice became stern, "you have to tell your husband. Today. This is serious, and you need to gather evidence, photos, videos, his license plate number if you see it. Then you can go to the police." "And what am I supposed to tell the police?" Meredith asked bitterly. "That this man shows up where I am and stares at me. I don't think that counts as a crime." "Not in every case, but systematic stalking is against the law," Fiona replied. "In any case, you need to document everything. Write down the dates, places, and a description of his behavior. You'll have a file on this guy if the situation gets worse." Meredith promised she would. After their conversation, she opened a new document on her laptop and wrote down all the times she had seen the stranger, along with the dates and a description of his behavior. When she had the complete list in front of her, her anxiety only intensified. This was definitely not a coincidence. Nolan came home around 11 o'clock, tired and irritable. It didn't seem like the best idea to talk to him about her fears right now, but Meredith remembered Fiona's insistent advice. "Nolan," she began as her husband was about to go upstairs to bed, "I need to tell you something important." He stopped on the stairs, turning to her with visible effort. "Of course, what's wrong?" Meredith gestured for him to return to the living room, and when they sat down, she recounted all the times she had noticed the same stranger. "I'm sure he's following me," she concluded. "That's 5 times in 8 days, in completely different places." Nolan rubbed his nose thoughtfully, a gesture he made when he was analyzing a complex problem. "Are you sure it's the same person?" he finally asked. "Not just similar people?" "Absolutely sure," Meredith replied firmly. "I'm good at remembering faces. Plus, he has a very distinctive appearance, tall with a dark beard streaked with gray, always well-dressed. And what does he do when he sees you?" Nolan frowned. "Does he approach you? Does he talk to you?" "No, he just looks at me. Sometimes he pretends not to notice me, sometimes he watches me openly. And today in the bookstore he smiled at me as if we were acquaintances." Nolan sighed and leaned back against the sofa. To be honest, it doesn't sound particularly threatening, he said. Maybe it's just a coincidence. River Hill isn't a big city. It's pretty easy to run into the same person several times, especially if they live in our neighborhood. 5 times in 8 days? Meredith exclaimed. In different places? That can't be a coincidence, Nolan. Okay, fine, he said, raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture. But what exactly is bothering you? He didn't approach you. He didn't threaten you. Maybe he just liked you. I'm a married woman of 42, not a young beauty, Meredith snorted. That's not the point. There's something about the way he looks at me. It's unsettling, like he's hunting me. Nolan rubbed his tired eyes. Look, I understand you're upset, but we have no evidence that this man is dangerous. Maybe he really did move in recently and happens to be in the same area as you, or maybe he works nearby. Meredith felt irritated. She had expected her husband to take the situation more seriously, to show concern, to offer protection. Instead, he seemed to think her anxiety was exaggerated. You don't believe me, she said, not as a question but as a statement. I believe you've seen the same man several times, Nolan replied cautiously. But I'm not sure that means he's stalking you or posing a threat. Let's do this. If you see him again, take a photo, and if you can, find out his name or his license plate number. Then we'll have something concrete to work with. And until then, I'm just supposed to put up with him being everywhere I go? Meredith's voice sounded hurt. That's not what I meant, Nolan sighed. It's just, without proof, it's hard to do anything. Neither the police nor I can arrest or remove someone just because they happen to be in the same public places as you. Meredith nodded silently, knowing her husband was right, even though it didn't make her feel any better. She had no evidence except her own feelings and observations. She felt vulnerable and, worst of all, misunderstood. Let's go to bed, Nolan said, getting up. You're just tired. Everything will look different in the morning. But in the morning, nothing had changed. Meredith still felt uneasy, remembering the stranger's intense gaze and knowing smile. After breakfast, when Nolan was about to leave for work, she decided to ask him for help again. Nolan, could you take me to the pharmacy today? She asked. And maybe pick me up after work? He paused in the doorway, clearly not expecting such a request. Today? I have an important meeting with contractors at 9, and I was planning to stay at the site until late. Why are you asking? Because of that man. Meredith tried to keep her voice calm. I'm scared to drive alone. Nolan sighed, his face reflecting the internal struggle between his desire to help his wife and his work obligations. I can't today, I'm sorry, he said finally. But maybe you could ask Fiona, or call a taxi. Don't worry, Meredith replied coldly. I'll manage. She could see that her husband was hesitating, but in the end he just nodded and left. Meredith was left alone, feeling increasingly anxious and lonely. She was distracted at work, constantly glancing out the pharmacy window, hoping to see a familiar figure. During her lunch break, she didn't go to the cafe across the street as usual, but stayed in the back room, eating a sandwich she had brought from home. In the evening, as she left the pharmacy, Meredith looked around carefully before heading for her car, and then she saw him. The man was standing near the newsstand across the street, pretending to browse the newspapers, but his gaze was fixed on her. This time, Meredith didn't panic. She took out her phone and took a few pictures, trying to be discreet. Then she quickly got into her car and locked the doors. Her heart was pounding as she drove out of the parking lot. As she passed the kiosk, Meredith noticed that the man was watching her, not even trying to hide his attention. That was the last straw. Instead of driving home, she headed to the school where Fiona worked. Classes were over, but her friend often stayed late to check papers or prepare for the next day. Meredith called her from the parking lot. "Are you still at school?" she asked when Fiona answered. "Yes, in my office. Why?" I'm here. Can I come in? 5 minutes later, they were sitting in an empty literature classroom, and Meredith was showing Fiona the photos she had taken near the pharmacy. Look, there he is. He's following me again. Fiona studied the pictures carefully. The quality wasn't great. Meredith had taken them in a hurry and from a distance, but the man's figure and face were clearly distinguishable. He's definitely watching the pharmacy, Fiona agreed. This is serious, Mur. Have you told Nolan? Yes, last night, Meredith grimaced, remembering the conversation. He thinks I'm exaggerating. He says nothing can be done without proof. Well, here's your proof, Fiona nodded at the phone. What are you going to do? I don't know, Meredith admitted honestly. If I go to the police, they'll probably say the same thing Nolan did. Technically, this man hasn't done anything illegal. He hasn't threatened me or harassed me. He just watches me. Have you thought about talking to him? Fiona suggested. Just ask him what he wants. Are you crazy? Meredith exclaimed. I'm scared of him. Sometimes the best way to deal with fear is to face it head on, Fiona said wisely. Besides, you'll be in a public place. He's unlikely to do anything dangerous with witnesses around. Meredith shook her head. No, I don't want to interact with him in any way. That will only encourage him. Then you have two options. Wait until he does something that could be considered a clear violation of the law, or… Fiona paused. Or what? Or hire a private investigator, Fiona suggested. Have him find out who this guy is and what he wants. Meredith looked at her friend skeptically. A private investigator? Seriously? This isn't a detective novel, Fiona. Why not? It's a perfectly viable option. I had a student a few years ago whose father works in that field. I can get his contact information if you want. Meredith thought about it. The idea seemed extravagant, but on the other hand, she was at a dead end. The police were unlikely to help. Nolan wasn't taking the situation seriously, and she was afraid to confront the stranger herself. Okay, find out his contact information, she finally agreed. But first, I'll talk to Nolan again. I'll show him the photos. Maybe now he'll believe me. That evening at home, Meredith brought up the subject again while she and her husband were having dinner. I saw him today. The man I told you about, she said, taking out her phone. And I took a photo. Look. Nolan studied the photos carefully, his face becoming serious. Yes, it looks like he was watching the pharmacy, he admitted. That's strange. Did you notice if he had a car? No, I didn't, Meredith shook her head. But this is the 6th time I've seen him. It can't be a coincidence, Nolan. I agree, he nodded, and Meredith felt a huge sense of relief at this simple acknowledgement. Her husband finally believed her. But what does he want? If his intentions were romantic, he would have approached you by now. And if he wanted to harm you, he would have done something by now. Instead, he's just watching. It's like some kind of investigation. An investigation? Meredith asked. You think he's a detective or something? Maybe, Nolan shrugged. Or a private investigator hired by someone who's interested in you, or us. But who would want that? Meredith shook her head in confusion. We're just ordinary people. We have no wealth, no power, no secrets. Everyone has secrets, Nolan said thoughtfully. The question is, what kind is this person looking for? His words made Meredith shiver. She felt vulnerable, as if someone was digging into her life without her knowledge, examining her habits, her daily routine, her connections. It was an invasion of her privacy, as real as if someone had broken into their home. What should we do? She asked quietly. Keep documenting every encounter, Nolan replied. Take photos, note the time and place, and if you can, find out his license plate number. That will help us identify him. I'll go with you to work tomorrow and pick you up in the evening. Let's see if he shows up when you're not alone. Meredith nodded gratefully. Even though she knew Nolan couldn't accompany her all the time, He had his own work and commitments. But even this simple gesture of support meant a lot to her. They went to bed earlier than usual. Nolan fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from a hard day's work. Meredith lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the house, startling at every rustle. She imagined the stranger standing outside, looking at their windows. The thought sent shivers down her spine. Meredith got up and went to the bedroom window. She pulled back the curtain and peered into the darkness. The street was empty. Only the streetlights cast yellow patches on the asphalt. No cars, no figures. A perfectly ordinary night in the suburbs. And yet Meredith couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She returned to bed, mentally replaying the events of the last few days. Who was this man? What did he want? Why had he chosen her? Questions swirled around in her head, keeping her awake. And somewhere deep inside, she had an uneasy feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever this stranger was planning, he wasn't going to stop. And that thought sent a chill through Meredith's heart as she finally drifted off into a restless sleep. The work week was coming to an end. Fridays at the construction company were always busy. All current issues had to be resolved before the weekend. Nolan Price sat in his office reviewing reports on the progress of the Westside Green residential complex. Problems with the foundation on the western section were finally being resolved, but the deadline was still looming. His secretary knocked on the door and peeked in. "Mr. Price, you have a package." The courier said it was urgent. She placed a thick brown A4 envelope with no stamps or return address on the desk. Only Nolan's name was written on the front in neat block letters. "Thanks, Janet," Nolan nodded, putting his documents aside. When the secretary left, he picked up the envelope and turned it over in his hands. Strange. No identifying marks, no company logo, nothing. He tore open the top and took out the contents. Photographs. A dozen glossy, high-quality prints. All of them were of Meredith in different places at different times. In a cafe, at the entrance to a pharmacy, at the gym, at the supermarket. And in every photo, she was with the same man she had mentioned. Tall, with a dark beard streaked with gray. In some photos, they were just standing close to each other, but there were others that were more provocative. Here they are sitting at a table in a cafe, leaning toward each other as if engaged in an intimate conversation. Here, Meredith is smiling at him, standing by a car in a parking lot. And here they are leaving a building that Nolan didn't recognize, apparently a hotel on the outskirts of town. The last photo was the most revealing. The man was hugging Meredith around the waist and she wasn't pushing him away. Their faces were blurry, as if the photographer had taken the photo from a distance with a strong zoom, but their figures were clearly distinguishable. Nolan felt nausea rising in his throat. His wife's words echoed in his head. "He's everywhere I go. It's starting to scare me." But these photos told a completely different story. They didn't look like surveillance shots, more like evidence of a secret relationship. He leaned back in his chair, trying to collect his thoughts. Meredith had been his wife for 15 years. He knew her to be a trustworthy, honest person. Could she be leading a double life? Could she be complaining of stalking to divert suspicion from herself? Nolan picked up his phone, intending to call her, but stopped. No, this wasn't a conversation for the phone. He had to see her face when he showed her the photos. He had to see her reaction. He put the photos back in the envelope and put it in his briefcase. Then he called his foreman and told him he was leaving early due to personal circumstances. On the way home, Nolan tried to stay calm. He replayed the last few weeks in his mind. Had there been anything unusual about Meredith's behavior? He hadn't noticed anything suspicious, but to be honest, he had been so busy with the project that he could have missed a lot. At home, he found Meredith in the kitchen, singing to herself as she prepared dinner. When she saw her husband, she raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You're home early," she remarked. "Did something happen?" Nolan put his briefcase on the table and took out an envelope. "This was delivered today," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I think you should take a look." Meredith wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and took the envelope. She took out the photos and began looking through them one by one. Nolan watched her face closely. At first, her eyes reflected confusion, then shock, and finally, sheer horror. "What is this?" she whispered, turning pale. "Nolan, this is fake. We never—" She grabbed the edge of the table as if her legs were about to give way. "This man is really stalking me, but all these situations," she faltered, "they never happened. I haven't spoken to him except for that one time at the pharmacy, and we definitely weren't together in any hotel." Nolan studied his wife. Her reaction seemed genuine shock and fear. "But these photos—" "Some of them look very realistic," he said, pointing to a picture of them standing close together in a parking lot. "Was that you?" "No," Meredith exclaimed. "I mean, I saw him in the parking lot of the mall last week, but we didn't talk. He was on the other side of the lot, just looking in my direction. Nolan, I swear this is all a lie." Her eyes filled with tears. She was scared, confused, but Nolan didn't see guilt in her eyes. "I believe you," he said finally, feeling the tension of the last hour ease a little. "But someone really wants me to think otherwise." He took the photo of the hotel and studied it closely. "Look," he pointed to the details. "This is clearly a montage. The shadows fall at different angles and the edge of your figure is too sharp. It's not natural. Someone has joined two different photos together." Meredith breathed a sigh of relief. "So you don't think I—" "Of course not," Nolan replied firmly. "We've been together for 15 years. I know you." He gathered the photos and put them back in the envelope. "The question is, who did this and why? Who wants to destroy our marriage?" Meredith shook her head, wiping away the tears that had welled up in her eyes. "I don't know, but it has something to do with the man who's been stalking me. Maybe he wants—" She didn't finish her sentence, but Nolan understood. If he believed the photos and kicked his wife out, she would be left alone, vulnerable. "We have to find out who he is," Nolan said firmly. "I have a couple of friends who can help." That evening, after Meredith fell asleep, exhausted from stress, Nolan sat down at his laptop and wrote 2 messages. The first was to Silas Morrison, an old friend from college. Silas worked at an IT company and was a real computer genius. The second was to Brock Jennings, a former military man Nolan had met while building a veterans center a year ago. Since then, they had met regularly at the shooting range, where Brock had taught him how to shoot. In both messages, Nolan briefly described the situation and asked to meet on Saturday. Both friends agreed almost immediately. On Saturday morning, Nolan left Meredith at home. She was still reeling from yesterday's discovery and preferred not to go out. He met his friends at a small bar called Mike's on the outskirts of town. Silas was the first to arrive, a tall, thin man with thin-rimmed glasses and perpetually tousled blonde hair. Despite being 38, he looked younger and always wore T-shirts with computer game prints. "So, your wife has a stalker?" he asked after greeting Nolan. "Sounds like the plot of a thriller." "Unfortunately, it's reality," Nolan replied, showing him the envelope with the photos. "And someone wants me to think she's having an affair." Silas looked through the photos, professionally assessing the quality of the editing. "Not bad work, but obvious if you know what to look for," he said, returning the photos. "Do you know this man?" "No, only that his name is Dexter Reed. That's how he introduced himself to Meredith." At that moment, Brock approached them, a strong, middle-aged man with a military bearing and short-cropped graying hair. His tanned face was lined with wrinkles, and a small hearing aid was visible in his right ear, the result of a concussion in Iraq. "Problems, boss?" he asked instead of a greeting, shaking Nolan's hand. "You could say that." Nolan nodded and quickly brought him up to speed. Brock listened attentively without interrupting, then looked at the photos. Meredith says she's never met this man intentionally, he asked. Never, Nolan confirmed. He just shows up in the same places she does, and now someone sent me these fake photos. This is professional work, Brock remarked, examining the photos. Not some amateur playing around with Photoshop. So either this Dexter guy has some serious skills or he hired someone. Why would he do this? Nolan asked. If he's stalking my wife, why try to destroy our marriage? Maybe he wants her to be alone and vulnerable, Silas suggested. It's a classic predator tactic to isolate the victim. The thought made Nolan uncomfortable. We need to find out who this Dexter Reed is and what he wants, he said firmly. I can look for information about him online, Silas offered. Check social media, public databases. Do you have any photos of him alone without Meredith? Only these, Nolan pointed to the photos, but I can crop them. Do that and send them to me. I'll run them through facial recognition software. I can follow him if we find out where he goes regularly, Brock said. I was a scout in the Army. I know how to stay under the radar. Meredith said he often goes to the Morning Dew Cafe across from the pharmacy where she works, Nolan recalled, and to the Fit Zone gym too. Okay, I'll check those places, Brock nodded, but I need a photo of him so I know who I'm looking for. I'll send it to you as soon as I get it, Nolan promised. And one more thing, be careful. We don't know who he is or what he's capable of. Don't worry, boss, Brock smiled. I've seen enemies scarier than some stalker with Photoshop. They've agreed on a plan of action. Silas will search for information about Dexter on the internet. Brock will conduct surveillance in the places where he was seen, and Nolan will accompany Meredith wherever possible to ensure her safety. If we find anything concrete, we can go to the police, Nolan said. But for now, all we have are suspicions and fake photos. Speaking of photos, Silas raised his finger. I can check their metadata, information about when and where they were taken, the camera model, and so on. That might give us some clues. Great, Nolan nodded. I'll send you the scans. They parted with an agreement to stay in touch and report any findings. On the way home, Nolan felt a strange sense of relief. He was scared for Meredith, but at least now he wasn't alone in this situation. He had support, a plan, and the determination to get to the bottom of things. At home, Meredith greeted him with a tense expression. How did the meeting go? She asked as he hung his jacket in the hallway. Good, Nolan replied. Silas will look for information about Dexter online, and Brock will conduct surveillance in the places where you saw him. Surveillance? Meredith nervously clenched her fingers. Isn't that dangerous? Brock knows what he's doing, Nolan reassured her. He's been through Iraq. He can handle surveillance on some stalker. He hugged his wife, feeling her tension. We'll figure this out, he promised. We'll find out who this man is and what he wants. What if, she faltered, what if he's dangerous? Then we'll have evidence for the police, Nolan said firmly. We won't let him intimidate us. Meredith nodded, but fear still lingered in her eyes. Nolan understood her. It wasn't every day you found out that someone was not only stalking you, but also trying to destroy your marriage with false evidence of infidelity. That evening, Nolan processed the photos, cut out Dexter's image, and sent them to Silas and Brock. Then he sat down next to Meredith on the living room couch. Tell me again everything you know about him, he asked. Any detail could be important. Meredith thought for a moment. He's tall, slim, with a dark, neatly trimmed beard with gray streaks. He's always well dressed, business suits or high-quality casual clothes. I saw him on the treadmill at the gym. He looks in good shape for his age. How old is he approximately? I'd say between 40 and 50. It's hard to say for sure. When did you first notice him? About 3 weeks ago, Meredith replied. First at the pharmacy, he bought some headache medicine. Then later that day at the cafe across the street and in the evening at the gym. And since then, he's been showing up wherever you are. Not every day, but often enough that it's strange. I've only seen him once in some places, but several times in others. Nolan wrote everything down in his notebook. A disturbing picture was emerging. Someone was clearly following Meredith, studying her daily routine and the places she frequented. And now these fake photos. Who could we have crossed? He said thoughtfully. Do you have any enemies? Maybe some unhappy customers at the pharmacy? Meredith shook her head. I can't think of anyone. I'm just a pharmacist. I don't make any important decisions. And our pharmacy doesn't even sell any strong drugs that would attract addicts. What about you? She asked after a pause. Could it be related to your work? Competitors? Dissatisfied contractors? Nolan thought about it. Competition in the construction business was fierce and not always fair. His company had won the bid for the West Side Green residential complex, beating out several serious contenders. Maybe, he admitted, although it seems too extreme. Usually, competitors act through lawyers or inspections, not by targeting family members. They discussed possible motives at length, but came up with nothing concrete. Too little information, too many unknowns. Before going to bed, Nolan checked his email. Silas sent a short message. I've started searching. Nothing concrete yet on Dexter Reed with that description. But there's something interesting about the photos. They were all taken with the same camera, an expensive professional model. And judging by the metadata, some of the photos were taken on days when Meredith says she didn't see this man. I'll keep digging. It was the first lead. Someone had been following Meredith with a professional camera, taking pictures and then editing them to create the illusion of a relationship. But why? Nolan turned off the computer and lay down next to Meredith, who was already asleep. He hugged her, feeling her instinctively press herself against him even in her sleep. 15 years together wasn't just a number. It was shared memories, habits, little everyday rituals, thousands of days when they fell asleep and woke up together. He wouldn't let some stranger destroy what they had built. Whoever this Dexter Reed was, whatever his motives, Nolan was determined to protect his family. And to start with, he needed to find out who he was dealing with. 3 days after the meeting at the bar, Nolan's phone rang early on Tuesday morning. It was Brock. I found your guy, he said without preamble. He's at the morning dew alone. Looks like it's his morning ritual, coffee in the paper. Don't let him get away, Nolan said, quickly getting dressed. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Hanging up, he turned to Meredith, who had already woken up and was looking at him questioningly. Brock found Dexter, he explained. I'll meet with him and find out what's going on. I'll go with you, Meredith said immediately, throwing back the covers. No, Nolan replied firmly. We don't know what he wants. Stay home where you're safe. I'll call you as soon as I find out anything. Meredith reluctantly agreed, although it was clear she didn't like being left behind. 15 minutes later, Nolan was pulling up to the Morning Dew Cafe. He parked in an alleyway with a clear view of the entrance and dialed Brock's number. I'm here. Where are you? In the car across from the cafe, gray van. Your target is still inside, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee. Looks like he's reading something on his tablet. Nolan saw the van and waved. Brock slipped out of his car and walked over to him. Here's the plan, he said, getting into the passenger seat. I'll go in first and sit nearby. You come in a couple of minutes later and sit next to him. If he tries to escape, I'll intercept him at the exit. Nolan nodded, feeling his heart pound with adrenaline. He wasn't a fighter, but now he had to face a man who threatened his family's happiness. Brock got out of the car and walked slowly toward the cafe. Nolan waited 2 minutes, took a deep breath, and followed him. The cafe was fairly empty, a typical Tuesday morning. Dexter was sitting at a table in the corner, his back to the wall with a view of the entire room. It was a smart position. He had the whole place under control. Nolan recognized him immediately from the photos. A tall, fit man with a neat dark beard streaked with gray. He looked about 45, dressed conservatively but tastefully. A dark blue blazer and a light-colored shirt without a tie. Brock had already taken up position at the bar, pretending to study the menu. Nolan nodded to him and headed purposefully toward Dexter's table. "Mr. Reed?" he asked, stopping in front of him. "Dexter Reed?" The man looked up from his tablet and Nolan saw his eyes, dark brown, attentive, appraising. "Yes," Dexter replied calmly. "How can I help you?" "My name is Nolan Price," he said, watching his companion's reaction. "I'm Meredith Price's husband." Not a muscle moved in Dexter's face. He simply nodded, as if he had been expecting this meeting. "Have a seat, Mr. Price," he said, pointing to an empty chair. "I think we have something to talk about." Nolan sat down, keeping his eyes on Dexter. "You're stalking my wife," he said without preamble. "Why?" "Stalking is a strong word," Dexter replied calmly. "I would say I'm watching her, and not just her." "For what purpose?" Dexter tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. "Professional," he replied finally. "I'm doing a job, nothing personal." "A job for what?" Nolan felt anger boiling up inside him, but he tried to remain calm. "To intimidate my wife? To fake photos that make her look like a cheater?" "Ah, so you got the pictures," Dexter smiled slightly. "Then we can get right down to business." "What business?" Nolan leaned forward. "Who hired you, and why?" At that moment, Brock approached their table and sat down next to Nolan without invitation. "You've got a problem, buddy," he said to Dexter. "A big problem. Stalking, falsifying evidence, invasion of privacy. That's a long time in the slammer." Dexter glanced at Brock, assessing his military bearing and determined expression. "Ex-military?" he asked. "Intelligence or special forces?" "None of your business," Brock snapped. "Start talking or we'll continue this conversation at the police station." Dexter sighed as if conceding defeat. "All right," he said. "You're right. I was hired to watch your wife, and yes, I took the photos you received. Some of them are real. I was just in the same place as Mrs. Price. The others, let's just say they've been artistically enhanced." "Who hired you?" Nolan repeated. Dexter paused as if weighing his options. "Look, I've been in this business for 10 years, he said finally. "I create situations that appear compromising but are actually innocent. I take photos that can be interpreted in two ways. My job is to create the illusion of infidelity, but nothing more." "Why?" Nolan was puzzled. "What's the point?" "Different clients, different motives," Dexter shrugged. "Sometimes it's jealous spouses who want to test their partner's reaction. Sometimes it's people who want to break up someone else's relationship. And sometimes," he faltered, "sometimes it's people who are just jealous of other people's happiness." "Name," Brock demanded. "Who hired you to follow Meredith?" Dexter sighed again. "Look, I have professional ethics. I don't reveal my clients' names." "Ethics?" Nolan struggled to keep from grabbing him by the collar. "You scare women, fabricate lies, destroy relationships, and you talk about ethics." "I never cross a certain line," Dexter said firmly. "No physical contact, no threats, just surveillance and photographs. And I always turn down jobs that could lead to violence." "Noble scumbag," Brock snorted. "Name the name or I'll beat it out of you myself." "No need to threaten me," Dexter replied calmly. "Is it murder or rape?" "No. It's a job, albeit not the most noble one. And most of my clients are women, by the way." Nolan suddenly felt a chill. Women. Most of Dexter's clients are women. "Fiona Welsh," he said, watching Dexter's reaction. "Did she hire you?" From the way Dexter's face froze for a moment, Nolan knew he had hit a nerve. "I can neither confirm nor deny that," Dexter said cautiously. "It's her," Nolan said, turning to Brock. "Fiona is Meredith's best friend. They've been friends since childhood." "What a twist," Brock whistled. "Her best friend hired someone to harass her? Why?" I don't know. Nolan shook his head. But I'm going to find out. He turned back to Dexter. What exactly did she ask you to do? Dexter paused, then, apparently deciding that there was no point in denying it, said, to watch your wife. Create situations that would look like cheating in photos. Send those photos to you. Basically, the standard break up a marriage package. And how much did she pay you? $3,000 up front. She was supposed to pay $2,000 more after successful completion. Successful completion? Nolan asked. You mean after the divorce? Exactly, Dexter nodded. However, I began to have doubts about this job almost immediately. I usually work with couples who have real problems, infidelity, lies. But here, your wife clearly loves you, Mr. Price. And judging by your reaction, you love her too. Relationships like that aren't easy to destroy. And yet you took it on, Nolan remarked bitterly. Business is business, Dexter shrugged. Do you have any evidence? Brock asked. Something that confirms that the client is indeed Fiona Welsh? Email correspondence, Dexter said. We discussed the details by email, and there's a recording of the meeting. I always record my first meeting with clients for my own safety. We need copies, Nolan said. What for? Dexter narrowed his eyes. What are you going to do? That's none of your business, Brock snapped. Come on, hand over the materials. Dexter thought for a moment. On one condition, he said finally. No police. I'll give you the evidence and you won't press charges against me. Nolan glanced at Brock. Brock nodded almost imperceptibly. Agreed, said Nolan. But from now on, you stay away from my wife. And from us, too. With pleasure, Dexter grinned. This job seemed strange to me from the start. Usually it's spouses who are on the verge of divorce. But here, such anger, such hatred, and for no apparent reason. What do you mean? Nolan asked. Usually people want to destroy someone else's relationship out of revenge, ex-lovers, cheated partners, or because of money, inheritance, insurance. But your friend, he paused, she just wanted to destroy your marriage. Because he's happy. I've never seen anything like it before. This admission made Nolan think. Fiona had been Meredith's friend for over 20 years. They had been through ups and downs together, supporting each other. At least, that's how it seemed. Give us your email address, Brock said, interrupting his thoughts. We'll send you a request for materials. Dexter took a business card out of his pocket and handed it to Brock. That's my work email. Write to me and I'll send you what I can. But keep in mind, I'll deny this conversation if you decide to use the information in court. When they left the cafe, Nolan felt mixed emotions. Relief at finally knowing the truth, and a sharp bitterness at the betrayal, not by Dexter, whom he didn't know, but by Fiona, who had been part of their lives for so many years. What now? Brock asked as they got into the car. Now we have to tell Meredith, Nolan sighed heavily. This isn't going to be easy. She and Fiona have been friends since they were teenagers. Let's wait for the proof from this Dexter guy first, Brock advised. So there's no doubt about it. Nolan nodded and dialed Silas's number to tell him the news. That evening, Silas sent a message saying that he had received all the materials from Dexter and verified their authenticity. The email correspondence has been verified by technical data. It's not fake, he said when the three of them met at Nolan's house. Meredith had gone to her parents' house on the other side of town, so they could discuss the situation in peace. And the voice on the audio recording of the meeting definitely belongs to Fiona Welsh. I compared it to her social media videos. What does she say on the recording? Nolan asked. Silas played it back on his laptop. Fiona's voice sounded sharp, with a hint of hatred Nolan had never heard before. I want you to destroy their marriage. Make Nolan believe that Meredith is cheating on him. With you. She mustn't know that this is a setup. She needs to feel hunted, scared. And then, when Nolan gets the photos, everything will come crashing down. God, Nolan whispered as he listened to the words. Why does she hate us so much? On the recording, Dexter asked the same thing. Can I ask why you want to destroy these people's relationship? It's important for my work. A pause, then Fiona's bitter laughter. Why? Because I can't stand their perfect life, their flawless marriage. They've lived in their cozy little world for 15 years, never knowing any problems. Meanwhile, 2 divorces, a string of failed relationships. Meredith always looks at me with such pity. I hate it. I want her to know what it's like when your world falls apart. I want to see her as broken as I am. Nolan turned off the recording. He couldn't bear to listen any longer. Envy, Brock said. Pure, unadulterated envy. And hatred, Silas added. Deep, long-standing hatred masked as friendship. Nolan thought about Fiona, whom he had known for many years. A striking, energetic woman, always the center of attention. But at the same time, she had a string of partners and was unable to build a stable relationship. And then there was Meredith, with her measured, quiet life and reliable marriage. How am I going to tell Meredith? He said aloud. It will break her heart. She needs to know, Brock said firmly. Fiona is dangerous. Who knows what else she's capable of? I agree, Silas nodded. Besides, now you have irrefutable proof. Audio recordings, email correspondence, confirmation from Dexter himself. Nolan sighed heavily and nodded. He had to tell his wife the truth, no matter how painful it was. When Meredith returned home, Nolan had already sent his friends away and was preparing for the difficult conversation. She entered the house with a slight smile. The trip to her parents' house had obviously lifted her spirits. How was your day? She asked, taking off her coat. Anything new? Meredith, we need to talk, Nolan said seriously. I found out who's behind the stalking and the photos. She froze, still holding her coat. Who? It's Fiona, he said simply, watching her reaction. Meredith laughed, nervously, incredulously. What? Fiona? No, this is some kind of mistake. She's been my best friend for 25 years. I have proof, Nolan said quietly. We met with Dexter Reed this morning. He confessed everything. Fiona hired him to destroy our marriage. Meredith shook her head, unwilling to believe it. No, she repeated. That's impossible. Why would she do that? Out of jealousy, Nolan replied. She's jealous of our happiness, our stability. Listen for yourself. He played the recording. Meredith's face changed as she listened to her best friend's voice, full of hatred and malice. By the end of the recording, she looked devastated. I can't believe it, she whispered. All these years, she was there, supporting me. And all this time, she hated me. Not all the time, maybe, Nolan said gently. People change. Something could have happened in her life that turned everything upside down. But why didn't she talk to me? Meredith's eyes were filled with tears. If she was having a hard time, if she felt I was looking down on her, I would have explained everything. I never thought she was worse than me. Nolan hugged his wife, feeling her tremble. Some things can't be explained, Mur. Sometimes people just see the world in a distorted way. She decided that you were happy and she wasn't. And instead of finding her own happiness, she decided to destroy yours. Meredith cried for a long time, pressed against his shoulder. 25 years of friendship, trust, support. It was all a lie. Or was it? Maybe there were good moments, real ones. But now it didn't matter. What do we do? She asked finally, wiping away her tears. Stay away from her, Nolan said firmly. We have proof of her actions if she tries anything, but I hope it ends here. I have to talk to her, Meredith said suddenly. I need to hear from her why she did this. Nolan shook his head. I don't think that's a good idea. She's dangerous, Meredith. Someone capable of such betrayal is capable of anything. I know Fiona, Meredith insisted. She won't hurt me physically. but I need to look her in the eye. I need to understand. Nolan could see that his wife would not back down. Perhaps she really needed this closure, this confirmation from Fiona herself. "All right," he finally agreed, "but not alone. I'll go with you." The next day, Wednesday, Meredith called Fiona and suggested they meet at her house that evening. Her friend's voice sounded normal, energetic, with a hint of sarcasm. She agreed without hesitation, which only intensified the pain of betrayal. Fiona had no idea that her plan had been uncovered. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Nolan asked as they got into the car. Meredith nodded. Her face was pale but determined. "I need to hear the truth from her, to understand how someone I considered my best friend could wish such evil on me." Fiona's house was in the eastern part of Riverhill, a small but cozy cottage surrounded by flowering hydrangea bushes. Meredith remembered helping her friend choose the bushes at the nursery 5 years ago. How many more moments of their friendship had been steeped in lies? They agreed that Nolan would stay in the car parked across the street. Meredith wanted to talk to Fiona alone, without witnesses. She was holding a small bag containing a printout of their email correspondence and a flash drive with an audio recording. "Be careful," Nolan said, squeezing her hand. "If you feel in danger, leave immediately. I'll be here." Fiona opened the door almost immediately. She was wearing a simple house dress, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked like her usual self, no signs of guilt or anxiety. "Meredith, come in," she smiled, stepping aside. "I just opened a bottle of wine. Would you like to join me?" As she walked into the living room, Meredith felt a lump rise in her throat. How many evenings had they spent here, talking about their lives, sharing secrets, supporting each other? And all this time, Fiona had hated her, envied her, wished her ill. "Is something wrong?" Fiona asked, noticing her state. "You look upset." Meredith silently took the printouts out of her bag and placed them on the coffee table. Fiona glanced at the papers and her face changed, first to confusion, then shock, and finally, understanding. "Where did you get these?" she asked quietly, sinking onto the sofa. "Dexter Reed told us everything," Meredith replied, remaining standing. "He admitted that you hired him to destroy my marriage." Fiona was silent, staring into space. Then she looked up at Meredith, and there was no remorse or shame in her eyes, only a kind of weary determination. "What do you want to hear?" she asked. "An apology? An explanation?" "The truth," Meredith replied simply. "Why, Fiona? 25 years of friendship, and you did this to me. Why?" Fiona stood up and walked over to the window, turning her back to Meredith. "Do you have any idea what it's been like to be your friend all these years?" she began. "Always perfect, Meredith. Always flawless. You have a perfect marriage, a stable job, a cozy home. You never make mistakes, you never do anything stupid." "That's not true," Meredith objected. "I've had problems too, you know that. Nolan and I couldn't have children. I lost my father. I had difficulties at work." "But you always managed," Fiona snapped. "You always found the strength. You always came out on top. And me? Look at me. 2 divorces, an endless string of failed relationships, a job that doesn't fulfill me. I'm stuck, Meredith. Stuck in a life that isn't getting any better." "And that's why you decided to ruin mine?" Meredith asked quietly. "I wanted you to feel the same way I do," Fiona said bitterly. "I wanted you to know what it's like when everything you thought was solid crumbles before your eyes." Meredith shook her head, unable to believe what she was hearing. "I've always supported you, Fiona. I was always there for you when you needed me. If you felt I was looking down on you, why didn't you say something?" "Because that's not what it was." Fiona sank back onto the sofa. "You didn't look down on me. You were condescending. Poor Fiona, another failed relationship. Poor Fiona, more problems at work. I saw it in your eyes, in your advice, in your support." It was friendship, Fiona. Meredith's voice faltered. I really cared about you. Like you care about a wounded bird, Fiona sneered bitterly. With pity. With gratitude that your own life isn't like mine. Meredith felt anger rising inside her. So instead of working on yourself, on your life, you decided to destroy mine? You hired someone to stalk me, scare me, make me feel unsafe. And then you tried to ruin my marriage with fake evidence of infidelity. That's not what a friend does, Fiona. That's what someone full of poison does. Yes, I'm full of poison, Fiona didn't argue. I'm tired of trying, tired of starting over after every failure. And you got everything on your first try. Nolan is your first serious man, and right away, you have the perfect marriage. It's not fair, Meredith. Life isn't fair, Meredith replied, but we choose how to respond to that unfairness. You chose betrayal. Fiona lowered her head, and for a moment Meredith thought she saw a glimmer of shame. But when Fiona looked up again, all she saw was exhaustion. So what now? She asked. Are you going to the police? No, Meredith shook her head. We have evidence, but we won't use it if you leave us alone, forever. How generous of you, Fiona said sarcastically. Even now you remain flawless. I'm not flawless, Meredith said quietly. I'm just a person trying to live with dignity, and I considered you my best friend. I loved you. I trusted you. That's my flaw. I'm too trusting. I didn't see envy in your eyes. I didn't notice the hatred in your words. I didn't always hate you, Fiona admitted unexpectedly. I really did love you as a friend once. But as the years passed, the gap between our lives grew wider and wider. I saw how happy you were with Nolan, how calm and confident you were about the future, and my life was a series of failures and disappointments, and I started to wonder, why you and not me? What did you do to deserve this happiness? You don't have to deserve happiness, Fiona, Meredith said gently. You have to build it, every day, one small step at a time. Nolan and I worked on our relationship. There were difficult times, but we chose each other again and again. Fiona was silent, staring at her hands. Then she said quietly, I'm sorry. Not for what I did. I guess I was already too far gone. But for losing myself in that jealousy. For becoming someone I would have despised. Meredith looked at the woman she had known most of her life and saw a stranger. Fiona, her cheerful, vibrant, impulsive friend, had turned into a person filled with bitterness and hatred. I'm leaving, Fiona, Meredith said, picking up her bag. And I'm asking you to stay out of my life. No calls, no messages, no accidental encounters. We have nothing left to say to each other. She headed for the door but stopped when she heard Fiona's voice. He'll cheat on you, you know. Sooner or later. Men always do. Meredith turned and looked at her with pity. No, Fiona. Not all men, and not all women betray their friends. That's your world, not mine. With that, she left, closing the door behind her. Nolan was waiting in the car, as promised. Seeing his wife, he quickly got out to meet her. Are you okay? Meredith nodded, though her throat was tight with unshed tears. Take me home, please. At home, she finally allowed herself to cry. Nolan just held her in his arms, not saying a word. He knew that any words of comfort would sound hollow right now. Meredith had lost the person she considered closest to her after her husband, the person with whom she shared her secrets, her fears, her dreams. I'm such a fool, she said when her tears had subsided a little. I didn't see what was obvious. Fiona was pretending for years. You're not a fool, Nolan replied. You're just a friend who believes in the best in people. There's no shame in that. But I should have noticed. I should have felt it. Sometimes people are masters at hiding their true feelings, Nolan said. And maybe she wasn't always like that. Maybe something broke her along the way. Meredith remembered Fiona's words. I didn't always hate you. Maybe Nolan was right. Maybe their friendship had been real, but over time it had turned into something toxic. "Why do you think she couldn't build a happy life for herself?" Meredith asked her husband. "Why did she decide to ruin mine instead?" Nolan thought for a moment. "Sometimes it's easier for people to blame others for their failures than to admit their own mistakes," he said finally. "Fiona blamed you. She blamed fate. She blamed the men who left her. But maybe she never asked herself what she was doing wrong." "I always tried to support her," Meredith said quietly. "To be there for her when times were tough." "I know," Nolan kissed her on the temple. "You're a good person, Meredith, and you deserve friends who appreciate that quality, not envy it." That night, Meredith couldn't sleep for a long time. She replayed her conversation with Fiona in her head, remembering moments from their friendship, trying to understand where it had broken down. When had kindness turned into envy? When had support become condescension? Maybe she really was too smug, too proud of her stable life. Meredith bitterly admitted that she did sometimes feel superior when she looked at her friend's chaotic life. She didn't talk about it, didn't even admit it to herself, but deep down, the feeling was there. But did that mean she deserved such betrayal? No. Fiona had crossed a line beyond forgiveness. The following weeks were strange. Life without Fiona left a void. There was no one to discuss the new book with, no one to call after a hard day at work. Meredith felt the loss keenly, but gradually the void began to fill. She spent more time with Nolan. They resumed their tradition of Friday dinners at restaurants and started going to the movies and the theater. Meredith signed up for a gardening class she had been dreaming about for a long time but had always put off. Nolan started taking her to some of his construction sites on the weekends, telling her more about his work than he had before. They were getting to know each other again, discovering sides of each other that had previously been hidden by the routine of everyday life. "You know," Meredith said one evening as they sat in the backyard looking at the stars, "despite everything that's happened, I'm almost grateful to Fiona." "Grateful?" Nolan asked, surprised. "For what?" "For waking us up," Meredith explained. "We've been together for 15 years, but lately we've just been existing side by side, not really seeing each other. You were immersed in your work and I was immersed in my routine. And now, we're together again. For real." Nolan nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. I took what I had for granted. I took our marriage for granted. It took the threat of losing it to make me realize how precious it is." Meredith rested her head on his shoulder. "Fiona wanted to destroy us, but she only made us stronger." They sat in silence, enjoying the moment of closeness. Meredith thought about how happiness really needs to be built every day and protected from those who want to destroy it. There was no news from Fiona. Meredith heard from mutual acquaintances that she had quit her job and moved to another city. She had started a new life. Maybe she finally understood that happiness cannot be stolen from others. It can only be created by oneself. As for Dexter Reed, he also disappeared from their lives. Silas periodically checked to see if his name appeared in any public records, but the man seemed to have vanished into thin air. Perhaps he found another job, less dubious. Their lives gradually returned to normal, but they were never the same again. Now they knew how fragile happiness could be, how easy it was to lose, and every day they made a choice in favor of each other, in favor of a love that had withstood the test of betrayal and only grown stronger. One Saturday morning, about 2 months after the confrontation with Fiona, Meredith was working in the garden, planting new flowers. Nolan came out of the house with 2 cups of coffee and sat down next to her on the garden bench. "I have a surprise for you," he said, handing her a cup. "I took 2 weeks off in July. I think we should go to the coast, just you and me." Meredith smiled, feeling warmth spread through her heart. Not because of the upcoming vacation, but because of the man sitting next to her, the man who had chosen her 15 years ago and continued to choose her every day. "I'd love to," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Just you and me." That was the truth that Fiona had never been able to understand. Happiness wasn't found in a perfect life without problems. Happiness is in the ability to go through difficulties together and come out stronger than before. Meredith and Nolan had gone through their trial, and their marriage, which Fiona had tried so desperately to destroy, was now stronger than ever.